So welcome again. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 19V seminar series. My name is Margaret Shamu. I teach at the Parsons School of Design at the New School. Our speaker today is Maria Chernysheva from Smolny Beyond Borders. She'll present her recently published book titled The Feminization of History in 19th Century Culture, Russian Art and the Polish Vector. And we have two собеседники today, Anna Dżabagina from Columbia University and Chrstine Ruane, University of Tulsa. So, Maria.
I would like to thank everyone who organized this wonderful 19V seminar. I would like to thank all who joined our session today. I'm also very grateful to Margaret for inviting me to participate and to Chrstine and Anne for agreeing to be the discussants. I'm excited to present my book to you today. Now I am sharing my presentation. Is it okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Prior to the 19th century, representations of history mostly focused on kings and great state events, particularly military victories. With the rise of the 19th century, historians, writers, and artists became increasingly fascinated by the history of culture, everyday life, and privacy. Within this new trend, writers and artists began depicting women from the national past more frequently than ever before, and these characters gained huge popularity. In my book, I refer to this phenomenon as the feminization of history, while understanding that history was still largely perceived as a mostly male field of action. Now I'm just scrolling several slides to give you a general impression, but to save time, I won't elaborate on them. I'm just scrolling. My materials include history paintings, book and journal illustrations, as well as fiction and non-fiction texts on history that had the greatest influence on artists. I move from the broader context of the 19th century European art, with the French school at its center, to the works of Russian and Polish artists. I am interested in female images as indicating the turn toward the private sphere in historical representation, a shift accompanied by the humanization, liberalization, and democratization of culture. This shift was noticeable not only in female images, of course, but they were especially potent in this regard. So the main question for me, isn't what images of women can tell us about women and their actual position in 19th century societies. The central question is how female images are connected to cross-gender humanizing tendencies of 19th century culture. Here I would like to give some examples. Martha Nussbaum and Lynn Hunt explored the relationship between stimulating empathy through female images in 18th century literature, painting, and opera on the one hand, and the advancements of liberalism and human rights on the other. In her book, Inventing Human Rights, Lynn Hunt notes, learning to empathize opened the path to human rights. As with the epistolary novel, so too in portrait painting, women played a highly charged role in the process of empathy. In her book, Political Emotions, Martha Nussbaum writes about this famous opera you see, The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. The Marriage of Figaro in this opera, Mozart sees that the ancien regime has formed men in a certain way, making them utterly preoccupied with rank and status. And about a female duet in this opera, she writes, an absence of hierarchy and a partnership based on responsiveness rather than dictatorial power. And she continues, the male world in Figaro is a kind of prison, as each man goes through life dominated by rank anxiety. What one could hear in the female duet in this opera was the promise of a world without that tension, a world in which one would then really be free to engage in the pursuit of happiness. Hunt and Nussbaum both discuss literature, painting, and opera of the 18th century, and they don't address depictions of history. Nevertheless, I believe it's appropriate and productive to apply their reflections to 19th century visual art that portrays women from the national past. In the book, I focus primarily on female images that emphasize feminine qualities in the depicted characters. For instance, here are two of the most famous paintings in 19th century Russian art. On the left is Princess Tarakanova by Konstantin Flavitsky, and on the right is Sofia Alexeyevna by Ilya Repin. While Princess Tarakanova looks undeniably feminine, Sofia extremely lacks femininity, and there is even something masculine in her appearance, as the first viewers of the canvas noticed. In the book, I use the adjective feminine with the following connotations. First, the feminine tends to be unofficial, free from the mission of personifying political power. Characters are more likely perceived as feminine when they either don't possess power or have forgotten about it or have lost it. Second, feminine characters are rather supposed to be non-militaristic, pacifistic, often unheroic, and sometimes even openly weak and defenseless. In addition, femininity is associated with emotions, often with love feelings, but also with maternal and family feelings. Sorry for these simplifications. Of course, I realize that this definition of femininity is stereotypical. I don't intend to discuss whether this femininity has anything to do with biological nature or social reality. That is beyond my objectives. I simply accept it as a working stereotype that was far more relevant in the 19th century than in our days. My next two slides are about this stereotype. In her famous book, Women, Art and Power, Linda Nochlin, who was one of the first feminist leaders in the field of art history, protests against this stereotype in both life and art. She writes that the depiction of women as passive, weak, domestic, sexually attractive, and powerless asserts men's power over, superiority to, difference from, and necessary control of women. I would note that first, in art, including many history paintings of the 19th century, men can also be portrayed as weak, domestic, and powerless. Second, there are other ways of perceiving and interpreting such images. For instance, Halina Filipovich makes a remark that differs from Nochlin's. In her book, Taking Liberties, Halina Filipovich mentions that regardless of authorial intention, The depiction of women's discrimination and oppression may serve to expose, not perpetuate patriarchal practices. It may even prompt readers to make decisions based on anti-patriarchal values. Looking at Princess Tarakanova, Linda Nochlin could have said that the painting expresses man's desire to dominate women. Halina Filipovich and Lynn Hunt could likely say that Tarakanova's image evokes the audience's empathy, stimulating the humanizing experience needed for the invention and protection of human rights, including those of women. I take Hunt and Filipovich's side. I believe that femininity in the represented historical figures not always, but often, facilitated the audience's empathy for them. Through this, it brought history closer to ordinary people, made history more accessible for individuals, and allowed them to feel more involved in it. In the end, it instilled in them the confidence in their right to belong to history. It gave them an individual right to history. Now I turn to the Polish vector and will say a few words about what I mean by this, as well as the results of my comparison Polish and Russian representations of women as historical figures. As is well known, from the end of the 18th century, after three partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, Poland ceased to exist as a state for over a century. A part of Poland, with Warsaw as its center, came under the control of the Russian Empire as the Kingdom of Poland. From the official perspective, the art created in the Kingdom of Poland was the art of the Russian Empire. However, Poland continued to exist as a nation, distinct from the Russian nation, and the art in Warsaw remained distinguishable from that of St. Petersburg and Moscow in various aspects and for many reasons. The starting point for me was the observation that while in 19th century Western Europe, particularly in France, artists created many charming and touching female images from national histories. Very few comparable images appeared in Russian art of the 19th century. In this regard, Princess Tarakanova by Flavitsky stands apart, and perhaps only Valentin Serov's sketch Princess Elizabeth Petrovna on the Hunt is comparable, both in its feminine theme and artistic merit. However, Serov, on the right, as you see, Serov completed his work much later, at the turn of the 20th century. From the same perspective, Polish art, in contrast, was quite fruitful. Here are just a few examples. On the right, here is, as you see, Alexander Lesser, and on the left is Jan Matejka. And here are two paintings by Joseph Zimler. Lesser and Zimler were artists from Warsaw, while Matejka was born in Krakow when it was still a free, independent, neutral city, though Austria soon annexed it. Unlike Lesser and Zimler, Matejka wasn't a Russian citizen, but I include some of his works in my book because he was the most gifted and the most famous Polish master of the 19th century. As for the art in the Kingdom of Poland, which was part of the Russian Empire, here Zimmler's death of Barbara Radziwiłł became a kind of Polish national icon. Polish artists, both inside the Kingdom of Poland and outside it, represented fascinating and touching women and girls from the national past in numerous works. Even more importantly, these representations contributed significantly to building and popularizing Polish national identity. There is a vast body of literature on the visual and textual representation of women and femininity as an integral part of the mythology about the Polish nation. I don't have time to go into details now, but I just want to stress that some of those female images, which at first sight may seem only romantic and lyrical, some of them played an important role in the Polish national self-definition. Returning to the Russian material, one can say that, for instance, Flavitsky's Princess Tarakanova contributed to picturing Russian national identity. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The very lack of comparable representations of historical women reflected certain tendencies in Russian national self-definition. Thus, in terms of the feminization of history, Polish culture was more successful than Russian culture. I would highlight three main reasons for that situation. First and foremost, in Russian history, especially before Peter the Great, women were much less active and visible than in Polish and Western European histories. Second, 19th century Europe had many historical sources, works of fiction and art that documented and depicted women as well as the everyday and private life of the past. Russia wasn't so lucky. There were fewer such sources available in Russia. I will quote some Russian authors of the 19th century who discussed that issue. In Russian, this is the first half of the 19th century. Петр Вяземский. Сомневаемся в богатстве наших материалов для романов вроде Вальтера Скотта. В нашей истории, по крайней мере до Петра Великого, нет нравов, общежития, гражданственного и домашнего быта, источников, необходимых для наблюдателя-романиста. Виссарион Белинский. Изобразить в романе Россию совсем не то, что изобразить ее в истории. Долг романиста – заглянуть в частную домашнюю жизнь народа, показать, как в эту эпоху он и думал, и чувствовал, и пил, и ел, и спал. А какие у нас для этого факты? Где литература, где мемуары? Остаются летописи, но с ними далеко не уедешь. Николай Устрялов. Мы не знаем подробностей столь занимательных в истории французской и английской. Не знаем, какое участие в делах и спорах князей принимали наши Ксения и Евдокия. И Фадей Булгарин. Наша древняя история не упоминает вовсе о самоотвержении наших витязей для угождения прекрасному полу. Красавиц считали в числе добычи и делились ими как драгоценными мехами. Наши предки любили жен как собственность. The two reasons mentioned above are obvious and closely connected with each other. I would like to draw attention to the third reason, which is less obvious. In my opinion, Russian artists were relatively less interested in contemporary historical novels and dramas. That fiction that was inspired by and could in turn inspire romantic and lyrical historical imagination. For instance, in the book, I note how surprisingly few paintings on Pushkin's historical subjects were created in 19th century Russia. And a few words about the book structure. As you see, It consists of chapters. Five chapters. The first chapter traces the origins and the main paths of feminization of history in European culture. The second chapter explores and partly reveals the 19th century Russian iconography of Marina Mniszek, a prominent Polish figure in Russian history. The third chapter is built around two Polish paintings depicting Russian historical subjects. The fourth chapter investigates several Polish paintings dedicated to Polish history. The final chapter analyzes the art strategy of the Russian Empire at the Exposition Universelle of 1867 in Paris, where in the Russian art section, Zimler's Barbara Radziwiłł and Flavitsky's Princess Tarakanova competed for audience sympathy. At the end of my talk, I would like to narrow my focus and very briefly present a specific case in my research. This is from chapter 2. A drawing by Adolphe Charlemagne, which you can see on this slide now. This drawing stands out in the iconography of Marina Mniszek. It was created in 1862 for the Северное Сияние magazine as an illustration for an article about Marina in Russia. Charlemagne depicts the period when Marina became the wife of the impostor false Dmitry II. In 1610, in Kaluga, where his camp was located, he was killed by the Tatar chieftain. The article describes the event that followed. And this is the episode that Charlemagne chooses to illustrate. I quote, Marina, lamenting not the death of her husband, but the loss of her own greatness, hurried to repeat the scene played out once in Tushina. The enchantress again appeared pale, sobbing, and disheveled. At night, she ran through the streets with torches in her hands, calling on the people of Kaluga to avenge Dmitry's death, and excited the citizens' minds to such an extent that by morning, not a single Tatar remained alive in Kaluga. So, Charlemagne represents this massacre led by Marina Mniszek. My hypothesis is that his drawing refers to Jean Delacroix's famous canvas, Liberty Leading the People. On the right is its reproduction from the mid-19th century. As is known, this painting commemorates the July Revolution of 1830. It was exhibited at the Paris Salon of the next year and acquired for the Luxembourg Palace by the state. By the mid-19th century, it was reproduced in various techniques. In 1855, the painting was displayed at the Exposition Universelle in Paris. In the same year, Charlemagne graduated from the Imperial Academy of Arts in St. Petersburg and then spent several years in Germany and France. It's possible that he saw the original painting, Liberty Leading the People, although it's more likely that he became familiar with it through reproductions. The key motif that establishes the connection between Charlemagne's drawing and Delacroix's composition is a young woman with bare breasts, decisively moving forward at the center of an armed crowd of men, leading them over corpses into battle for a better future. Since liberty in Delacroix's painting is also Marianne, a symbol of the French Republic. The heroines of Delacroix and Charlemagne are united, among other things, by the relationship between their names, Marianne and Marina. Both Delacroix and Charlemagne depict a struggle for power, but the direction of this struggle are opposite. The Parisian rebels fought for the liberalization of the monarchical regime and succeeded, while Marina Mniszek claimed the royal throne and lost. These scenes contrast even more stylistically. Delacroix glorifies the revolution, while Charlemagne mocks a riot. The central female figures are especially contrasting. Delacroix's liberty is a majestic beauty, elevated above reality. Charlemagne's Marina resembles a pretty cocotte who, half-dressed, has just jumped out of her boudoir. In Charlemagne's interpretation, Marina personifies not freedom, but debauchery. Additionally, Charlemagne appears sexist and ironic toward women who appropriate men's leadership qualities. Charlemagne creates a parody of Delacroix's revolutionary painting. In doing so, he parodies the very idea of uprising. In the Russian imperial context, the idea of rebellion had enduring Polish connotations. France's July Revolution, which inspired Delacroix, sparked unrest across Europe, including the Kingdom of Poland, then part of the Russian Empire. In 1830, the November uprising against Russian domination broke out in Poland. The dream of many Poles, both in the 1830s and later, was the restoration of the independence and greatness of the Commonwealth, which at the time of Marina Mniszek not only didn't submit to Muscovy, but partly controlled it. After the suppression of the November uprising in 1831, patriotic activity in the Kingdom of Poland, and even more so among Polish immigrants, didn't stop. Paris became the center of the Polish immigrant community. Throughout the 19th century, France, both in public and official spheres, sympathized with the Poles in their struggle against Russian rule. In the early 1860s, on the eve of the January uprising of 1863, the liberation movement in Poland intensified, with a new form added to its previous tactics, open mass demonstrations. In 1861, these demonstrations followed one another in Warsaw and were accompanied by clashes between participants and Russian troops, resulting in casualties. When Charlemagne was working on his drawing, the Polish question became extremely relevant and tense in Russian society. Given that the artist was close to the Russian imperial court, receiving many royal commissions, it's not surprising that, as his depiction of Marina Mniszek clearly indicates, he shared the official negative views on the Polish insurrections. Referring to Delacroix's liberty leading the people, Charlemagne metaphorically but quite transparently associated Marina Mniszek with contemporary Polish rebels. He portrays Marina as a Polish imitation of the French liberty. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Maria. That was fascinating. Great, wonderful. We are now going to go to our first собеседник, and that is Anna Dżabagina, who will deliver her remarks.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Maria, for your presentation. At the beginning, I would just like to express my regrets that I haven't had a chance to see the whole book because the table of contents looked very promising, but at least I had a glance into introduction. So first, I would like to express my appreciation for Maria's work. It was very refreshing and thought-provoking for me to see this type of framing, which investigates cultural production of Polish cultural production or cultural production of Kingdom of Poland as a part of the Russian Empire, and acknowledges Polish culture as a kind of semi-peripheral field, which is at the same time marginal and progressive and subversive towards the imperial center. I need to say that because I feel that Polish historiography of the 19th century, and especially, for example, literary history, tends to kind of undertake a separatist position in that regard, at the same time acknowledging and seeing Polish statelessness, but obscuring its belonging to the imperial frame and thus overlooking some connections and dependencies. And this type of framing, even I would say, even tends to be met with a kind of resistance. So, for example, Malterov's brilliant book on Russian officials in the Priwislansky Kraj was met with rather cold reception among the scholars of Polish literary history. But looking at the art production from the territories of the Russian Empire from that perspective allowed Maria to notice disproportionate use of feminine imaginary for portraying national history. Here, of course, particular geopolitical literacy is indispensable, since Polish territories at the period became a kind of a playground for inter-imperial clashes, and the conditions for artistic expression varied immensely across the different partitions. So, for example, example of Matejsko's painting mentioned by Maria is particularly telling because his Polonia wouldn't be possible if he was working from Warsaw, not from Krakow, right? This process of feminization of national suffering investigated by Maria played a crucial role in Polish visual and literary culture of the period. During the partition, of course, the figure of female figure or different figures of women became a widely recognized codes for expressing national martyrdom, forming a part of broader tradition of Aesopian speech, a means of circumventing censorship and saying things that wasn't allowed to be said in the open. So in literature, for instance, the motive of losing a mother, right, was often symbolized the loss of the motherland, embedding national grief within this familial imagery. This Aesopian speech stemmed, of course, from the conditions of a colonized nation, which cultural production became limited not only by the Tsarist censorship, but also by the internal demands for every aspect of public life, art and literature included, to be politicized and dedicated to conserving national identity, which, for example, made any other form of self-expression a more difficult task than in imperial center, for example. Nevertheless, this strategy, of course, played a crucial role of preserving Polish cultural and national identity at the time. Here, a small note on the margin. In her introduction, Maria mentioned early rise of the national consciousness in the 19th century Kingdom of Poland, but that is precisely because Poland already had a long and rich tradition of national culture and statehood, and even its own imperial ambitions. However, those in modern historiography are often obscured by the narrative of national martyrdom, right? This under the partitions, rather than discovering or creating the national identity, each tried to preserve it with the tools and strategies available with the Aesopian speech, among others. However, even though that feminine imaginary was aimed to, as I understand from Maria's introduction, was aimed to generate empathy and bring attention to the suffering of Polish nation, it was nevertheless embedded in patriarchal codes, and it was deeply rooted in patriarchal views of femininity rather than becoming a sign of proto-feminism. At the same time, what's interesting here is that the changes of social fabric brought by the fall of Polish uprisings, particularly the January uprising in 1863, paradoxically created a space for women's empowerment and emancipation. Quite literally, sudden absence of men, leaders, thinkers, artists, writers who were killed or exiled opened the doors for social engagements that were previously gatekept from women. This process is particularly visible in the field of literary production. It is not an accident that from the 60s and the 70s, Polish culture witnessed an unprecedented in the region professionalization of women writers and the rise of some of them to the highest heights of the canon. The canon was entered primarily by the novelist Eliza Orzeszkowa, poet Maria Konopnicka, among others. And this process was, of course, also linked to the rise of positivist movement and the shifts from revolution to evolution as a way to regain Polish independence. However, this was the process of the literary production, right? I'm not an art historian, so I was interested if you have a comment, for example, how can you see similar processes in the field of arts, for example? And at the end, I have a very, very small but interesting, perhaps, detail that caught my attention while reading your book. The word you use to describe failures of November and January uprisings is suppression, podawlenie. Well, in Polish narratives, and it stopped me because in Polish narratives, the verb usually used for the same events is the fall of uprising, right? So upadek instead of stłumienie. This detail perhaps somehow reveals some kind of different positionalities, which is an important factor for research work like this, and show how much we are embedded in languages and discourses that shaped us, even when we try to shift perspectives and cross boundaries. Because here, suppression kind of underscores the triumph of oppressor who managed to suppress the rebellion, while the fall underscores the failure of oppressed who didn't manage to kind of, win its freedom, their freedom and independence. Just a small detail, but maybe it was because it was the first time I read a book on Polish 19th century history in Russian, but it kind of, caught my attention. So those are few remarks at the beginning. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. We're going to continue, if that's all right. We're just going to go ahead and have comments from Chrstine or Ruane.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. And thank you to Maria for such a lot of food for thought, let's put it that way. And my comments too are based upon reading the introduction to her book. And I was happy to see all these amazing images that she brought with her this morning. Now, what is striking about Maria's work is that we can see female images operating within a colonial context, to use different words than Maria herself uses. In this case, Poland as the oppressed nation within the Russian Empire, but also the way in which France served as the metropole, if you will, for her Polish and Russian cultural colonies. And I think it's important to stress that all three of these political entities, at least in the 19th century, shared the same view of femininity and gender roles, whatever their historical differences. And so I think the bigger question that Maria is addressing is, how does this shared gendered imagery interact with and inform relations between the metropole and its colonies? What do these images express that cannot otherwise be articulated? At the end of her introduction, Maria concludes that, quote, Polish culture was allowed by the imperial officials, probably because they underestimated the potential of the feminine historical image in the formation of the image of the contemporary European nation. While I certainly agree that female imagery is frequently underestimated and even misunderstood, I would like to suggest some other factors that may have been at work in this process that she's describing. According to Richard Wortman, the Romanovs of both sexes were well versed in manipulating and controlling their images to project a particular scenario of power. Thus, the Tsarist regime was quite cognizant of the power of images to shape Russian life and culture, and they, of course, were determined to control these images. Where I think that Tsarist officials may have underestimated the paintings was in the potential for Polish scenes and heroines to resonate with imperial viewers, and particularly with Russian viewers. While the Tsarist officials looking at these paintings may have seen beautiful young women facing an unhappy ending, others could see real people who gave their lives to fight oppression. Given the large number of Russian subjects who were disgruntled with the imperial authorities and their policies, the fate of these Polish women had the potential, at least, to resonate beyond its historical subject matter. So it seems as though officials' blind spot was in thinking that no one could possibly draw any inspiration from these tragic events in these paintings. I was also reminded in reading Maria's introduction of an article written by Bill Wagner, aptly named "The Trojan Mare." In this piece, Wagner argues that Russian male liberals supported women's emancipation precisely because their support allowed the men to make the case for greater political freedom and equality for themselves. So if we use this image, the Trojan Mare is the women's emancipation movement, but in the belly of that movement lies the men waiting to get out to fight the battle for their own emancipation. I've always loved this article. Could it be that this same strategy was at work in the art world? Did the paintings of these tragic female figures from Polish history at the 1867 Paris exhibition represent the feelings and frustrations of those Russians and the other ethnic minorities within the empire who opposed the Tsarist government? In other words, could the grievances of the empire's colonial minorities also reflect the grievances of the metropole, who also longed to have the freedom to express their views? Finally, Maria terms the feminization of history as a form of soft power. This is indeed the common view in both liberal democracies and autocratic empires, that because women were barred from active political participation, they had no significant role in the life of their nations. However, as Maria herself has very powerfully shown us, portraits of women from the historical past can indeed challenge the status quo in dramatic and unexpected ways. So maybe we need to rethink what we mean by soft power and what constitutes women's participation in politics. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. Maria, would you like to respond to any of these comments? We're also will be taking questions from the audience later. So Maria, if you'd like to respond.
I think, first of all, I would like to respond to these very important remarks by Anne and Chrstine. And first of all, I would like to thank both Anne and Chrstine for their significant remarks and observations. As for Anne, it's very interesting you emphasized this gap between two words, two terms, suppression and fall. That is a very interesting remark, and actually I think you need to think it over, and this remark is is very patent. And as for a possible comparison between literary process and process in visual art of that time, you mentioned several women as writers. You said that many women writers worked fluidly in Poland in the 19th century. And as for the sphere of painting and visual art in general, all works which I consider in my book, all those paintings were created by men. But as for literary material, I paid attention, for instance, to a historical novel by Choisier Gouffier, an author of the very beginning of the 19th century. I mean her novel, which is titled Barbara Radziwiłł. And I paid attention to this fact that this person, this historical figure, Barbara Radziwiłł, was in the very center of Polish historical imagination, of Polish historical culture of the 19th century, both in literature and in visual art. And once again, Chrstine, thank you so much for your remarks, and especially maybe for your remark that maybe we should reconsider what the soft power means for the past and for our days too. Thank you so much once again.
So colleagues, we are going to open the floor to everyone else. If you would like to ask a question, please put it in the chat or else raise your hand or your virtual hand. You're welcome to ask a question, make a comment, or anything else. We'll have to we'll have to give you permission to unmute yourself. To unmute, you can't just unmute yourself and speak. So please ask a question or put something in the chat, raise your virtual hand. So, Anastasia, were you raising your hand for a question? We'll have to give you permission. So, Sasha, if you could put the history of art. Yes, okay, good, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I can't rename myself. I don't know why, but I'm Anastasia Loseva. And thank you very much, Maria. It was very impressive and really very interesting. And my small question is, what is your opinion? What is the message in general? What is the message in comparison with this Polish branch of the women images in Russian art?
Thank you for your question. You mean what was the role of such images, the images of Polish historical women in Russian art of that time? Yes.
Yeah, in comparison with the Polish painters, for example, of course, our big, great historical Sofia Alexeyevna and about Bayarnya Morozova. So how can you describe this this difference of the message of feminine images?
In general, I find as I tried to indicate, there were relatively few of touching and fascinating female images, images of historical women in Russian art. In comparing to Polish visual art and French visual art. I tried to show that, for instance, our famous Princess Tarakanova stands apart. In Polish art, there were a lot of such images were created, and in Russian art it wasn't so. There were very few comparable images, and this is the first difference between Polish, as you said, branch and Russian branch. Maybe I would add that, for instance, this famous Princess Tarakanova. This is the figure from the post-Petrin age, like Elizabeth Petrovna in this brilliant work painted by Valentin Serov. Two figures, two these characters are from the time after Peter the Great. If you are talking about Polish material, for instance, we see that Barbara Radziwiłł, for instance, Barbara Radziwiłł, because I think her figure is located in the very center of Polish national historical culture and imagination. Barbara Radziwiłł belongs to the 16th century. It's much earlier than the 18th century. Maybe this is the second aspect of this great difference between Polish and on the one, Polish female images from the national past on the one hand, and Russian images from the national past on the other hand. But of course, there are other aspects of this difference between at least these two national traditions of visual art. Thank you for your question.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, if anyone would like to ask a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. I wanted to ask a follow-up question, Maria, if I could, to continue what Anastasia was offering, because I think you're saying specifically you're interested in these touching and fascinating images, right? This is what you said. So you're talking about images that show women dying or women with their children, or
just nice, maybe just nice
images. Okay. And so what you're and so the Sofia Alexeyevna and the Boyarina Morozova are not that type.
Yes,
Right. They're more strong or defiant, a different mood. Okay.
Without feminine qualities. So.
I see. As right, the stereotypical feminine qualities, right? Okay. So are there other such images of the women without feminine qualities, or women without, like do you see more of those in Russia? Or do you find that there are other historical images of women like that?
You mean in Russia or abroad? Images without feminine qualities, or except Boyarina Morozova and Sofia Alexeyevna.
Yes.
Actually, maybe there are many female images which not so strong and masculine as that of Boyarina Morozova and Sofia Alexeyevna, but many of those images still lack such touching and fascinating and charming qualities that many of French and Polish depictions of historical women have. And yes, but this is a very interesting question. Thank you, Margaret. Actually, I think I mentioned in my book that in this famous painting by Surikov, Menshikov of Berezovye. So, of course, the main here is Menshikov himself, but as everyone knows, there are three children of Menshikov, and among them his daughter Maria looks very charming and touching at the same time. And I think this image is also something special and not too typical for Russian painting of the 19th century.
Thank you. I put that one in the chat in case anybody wants to be reminded of it. So if anyone has questions, I actually did want to follow up with something else. I know that in your book you speak about similar thing. You make comparisons not only in literature but also in opera and other fields of culture and other areas of culture. Could you just say a few more words about how the ideas from your work are reflected outside of painting? In other areas of culture, in music or art songs or opera and so on?
Yes, I may say a few words about a subject from the final chapter of my book, because in that chapter I I write about the painting by Sedov, a painting dedicated to Vasilisa Milentieva, who is considered as one of the wives of Ivan the Terrible. So this is the 16th century. I begin this part of that chapter with the remark that that painting by Sedov, Valentina Milentieva, or the title is Ivan the Terrible is looking at Vasilisa Milentieva. This composition by Sedov refers to the painting by Zimmler I mentioned previously in my talk today. The painting by Sedov, a Russian artist, refers to the painting by this Polish artist Zimmler, who was one of the most prominent Polish masters of the 19th century. And after that, after this comparison between two paintings by Sedov and by Zimmler, I go into details concerning the very subject, literary subject of Sedov's painting. And literary sources for Sedov was a drama by Ostrovsky and Gedonov. Among these two names, Ostrovsky and Gedonov, of course, the name Ostrovsky is much more known than that of Gedonov. As everyone here knows, Alexander Ostrovsky, one of the main Russian realist writers of the 19th century. There is a play, a drama, which is called Vasilisa Milentieva. The painter Sedov, he took his subject from this drama, and I consider the drama itself, and in book I express my feelings and my observations that the drama Valentina Milentieva by Ostrovsky and Gedonov is based on the libretto of opera Anna Boleyn. And these operatic sources for this Russian historical drama explains the special plot of this drama, the special plot of Vasilisa Milentieva, which I consider as not typical for Russian literature, for Russian drama of the 19th century. In my opinion, the play, the drama Vasilisa Milentieva stands apart in Russian 19th century culture as the painting by Flavitsky, Princess Tarakanova, stands apart too. In the case of the drama Vasilisa Milentieva, this special position of this work, I repeat, may be understood through the sources of the drama, the operatic sources of the drama. This operatic source of the drama, Vasilisa Milentьeva, made this drama untypical for Russian literary tradition, and it gave the drama, the play, this extremely, how should I put it, extremely lyrical and romantic intonations. Yes, this expressive, romantic and lyrical intonations, and in general, not those intonations that weren't so typical, not only for Russian painting, but partly, but nevertheless for Russian literature too. From this perspective, Russian literature, as I pointed out in my book, was nevertheless much more fruitful than Russian painting, much more lucky than Russian painting. But for instance, not so fruitful as French literature, I think. Thank you for your thoughts and very inspiring remarks.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I'm also interested in the ways that sometimes a subject will kind of revolve, it'll sort of capture the interest in literature, or it'll be published in, published in a serially in a journal, and then it'll appear in an opera, or a, and then a painter will take it up. We'll see that with Vasily Perov and some others. So it's just interesting how that kind of circulates in not popular culture, but I guess high culture in a given decade or in a certain time. So Sarah Dickinson is sharing some images in the chat with Ksenia Godunova, daughter of Boris, who seems to have captured the imagination, as she says. And these are, I haven't opened them all, but I think we have something by various things. Are these works that you're that you've considered? I don't know if you can open them.
This work, yes, of course, I know this work by Nevrev, but I don't pay attention to this work in my book for some reasons. Yes, but thank you for reminding us about of this work. Thank you for sharing your impression about this work by Nevrev.
Yes, so interesting. Great, thank you. So any other questions or comments? Anna or Chris, do you have anything that you wanted to add? Or, well, if not, then we are going to go ahead and draw to a close. Thank you so much, Maria, again, for your wonderful work. We're fascinated by this. It sounds like it certainly is a fascinating book. And Anna and Chris, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and собеседники today. So we'll look forward to seeing everyone again for another session of 19V in March. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.